Video 2, everyone. Video 2. Okay, so last time we talked, or tried to talk about, getting people to start thinking on the basis of the current crisis that's engulfing the world, what sort of society you may want to live in after all this is over, and whether or not this awful thing that is happening to the world could be a catalyst for some interesting change. But what are we actually changing? Not specifically rules, regulations, specifics. What organisations are we trying to change? What is it that we are maybe dissatisfied with? Which means we've got to talk about nations. Now, there are entire libraries of books written on the subject of nations, written by much, much smarter people than I, and I would heartily recommend that you go and read some of those books. But for our purposes, we need to understand a few things. Firstly, people don't like not understanding things, which seems like one of those innocuous, useless statements, but let me explain. When we look at a problem as humans, or a behaviour, or a creature that we don't understand because it is not human, we try to humanize it. We will personify it. We'll put emotions or motivations or feelings to a situation that is completely devoid of them. You see this a lot in popular trends on social media where, you know, you'll have a video of a gecko or of a fish or of a gorilla. Actually, gorilla's a bad example because they're primates and closer to us. Gecko or fish, and you'll see people reacting to it or sort of jumping on the back of this amusing video of a gecko smiling. Oh, you know, what a happy gecko that is. Whether or not the gecko feels happiness is genuinely not part of the conversation. I don't know if geckos can feel happiness. Most of the people commenting on those videos probably don't. I imagine there's some scientists out there who absolutely know if geckos can feel happiness. But the point is, in consuming the thing, humans try to personify it to make it understandable. The gecko smiles because it's happy, because when I smile, it's because I'm happy. Or I'm grimacing. Go figure which one. But the important thing about it is that we personify stuff that we don't understand. And we personify it in a way that often is detrimental to our ability to understand something. And we do this a lot with nations. We do it with lots of organisations, actually. I mean, like churches, businesses, or countries, doesn't matter. We apply human characteristics and human motivations to a organisation that isn't acting like a human. Now, you might think, well, of course they act like humans. They are, at their core, all the decisions made in those organisations and countries are made by humans, for now. And that makes them act like humans. What do you want about? Well, if you ever sit down and study economics, you will get taught, probably on day 1 or day 2 of your economics A-level, GCSE or degree, that the overriding economic objective of all nations is to maximise the welfare of their citizens. That is a noble goal to read. You know, it gets people on board with the idea, you know, like, I'm part of a nation and it will try and maximise my welfare is a good tagline to have. So why don't we just give people houses? You know, if the true goal is to maximise people's welfare, just give them a house. Give them a car. Don't make them work. You know, we'll produce most of what we need by robots, and, you know, we'll all take turns on the farm, and that's it. Welfare maximised. Which is an idea that exists in the world, and most people hate it. Yet that surely is the most logical way to maximise people's welfare. Provide everything they need to everyone, free of charge. Welfare maximised. You want a flash car? Go buy one. You know, that's a luxury good. But your food, your electricity, your water, your Wi-Fi, maybe, that's a debate. That's a thing at the moment. Your housing, free of charge. Just have it. The nation will give it to you. Welfare maximised. Job done. Economic objective completed. But we don't do that. And why don't we do that? Is it because that's not the most efficient way to maximise everyone's welfare? No. It's because that's not really the goal in the first place. Now, some of you will probably be having this uncomfortable kind of creeping feeling in your chest. You know, that one where you look at something and you don't really want to look at it anymore? A lifetime of education and media that have sold you this idea is warring with the new information you've just been given. And I'm going to have to back this up, or you're just not going to believe me. So I'm going to try. But don't worry about that uncomfortable feeling, right? Because we all got it when this sort of thing became apparent to us for the first time. It is not a pleasant realisation that your country fundamentally doesn't care about you. Whatever they say. Now, let's think for a moment what a nation does? Well, it's a massive club, if you will. It's a huge group of people that has laws and military. Sure, it has that. Well, why do we have a military? Well, in case other nations try and take something our nation owns. But if the other nation was a good nation and had, all of that stuff that I just mentioned, then would that matter so much? Because it'd still be maximising people's welfare. Sidetrack. They have roads, services, trains, maybe, unless you're Iceland. And they have relations, is the other thing. They do not exist in a vacuum. Since the dawn of nations, there have been more than one. And that means that Nation A, Nation B, Nation C, and D all have to talk to each other. And there is a million different ways that this can go. You have organisations like the European Union, where you've got, soon to be slightly less, large numbers of countries talking to each other on an amicable, friendly basis with, short disputes, but they have a parliament to sort those disputes out. You can have countries that really do not get along with one another and yet exist very, very close by. You can have countries that are in all-out war, the final disagreement, as many people would put it, which, again, we need to do another video on war and why that tends to happen, but go read some Donald Keegan and explain everything. The real issue of nations having relations with other nations is that they suddenly have a vested interest in their position in that charter, right? We often talk in the UK, we are the 5th or 6th wealthiest economy in the world. What does that mean? Does that actually matter arbitrarily to everyone on a day-to-day basis? Do I care if I have no job, nowhere to live, and no water coming out my tap that I don't have? If we're the 5th wealthiest or the 4th wealthiest or the wealthiest country in the world? No. It doesn't matter in the slightest. But it does matter to the other countries. Economic strength means money. Money means physical might, and that means power. Because do what we say, or we'll invade, is a pretty big threat. And if you're scared that the country you're talking to can back that up, you're going to listen to what they're saying. This is the origin of most power internationally. As uncomfortable as it may be, big army diplomacy is a huge part of international relations. Now, if we consider those nations and that pecking order that we just discussed have an effect on what the nation wants to do with its resources, suddenly that goal of maximising everyone's welfare doesn't feel as sort of be-all and end-all, does it? Okay, so we want to maximise people's welfare, but we also want to be the second wealthiest country in the world, and we want everyone to listen to us when we say things. And actually, that land over there, we want that. That's a goal for our country. Oh, there's people living there who'll be our citizens? Oh. Do we have to maximise their welfare too? These are questions that countries have asked themselves historically for a very, very long time. And most of us in the West have lived in an era of relative, big word, right? There's some glaring exceptions to this, relative peace. There has been no great conflict between the great powers of the world for the first time in a very long time. We have had no World War III, no Napoleonic War, no Peloponnesian War even. And that means that we have grown, I suppose, lax in our understanding of nations. If you asked somebody several hundred years ago, what does your country do for you? They would give you a host of answers, but probably nowhere on that list was maximise my welfare. If you ask people today, it's probably, they won't say it like that, most likely, but they would say something akin to it, because they naturally believe it. That's part of the public relations of countries. And I think this is quite dangerous. Nations don't act like people. We don't have friends, enemies in the same way. They have advantageous and unadvantageous positions to occupy. People worth being friends with and people not. If you have never played the game Diplomacy, it's a belter of a game and will teach you all this really, really quickly. That empathy that we feel when 11,000 people and counting have died in the UK is not necessarily felt by the UK as an organisation. It wants to do something about it because it's bad PR if it doesn't. We will try and save you because we want to maximise your welfare. But if that was true, our NHS would have as much protective equipment as it could possibly need. We would have spared no expense in rolling these things out. We would have, 100% of income guaranteed, housing and rent completely suspended. But we haven't. We've got some of those policies, but not all of them. We have some protective equipment, but not all of them. We have a million half measures. And people are asking, rightfully so, why are you not doing more? And those people, I don't think, generally, understand why countries are helping at all. If this pandemic kills 2%, 3% of the population of the UK. That is 2 or 3% not doing work, taxes, building stuff, keeping things run, not sustaining the goal of economic growth that we have considered sacrosanct for decades, hundreds of years even. So you can't die. You still have work to do and taxes to pay. And so to keep you alive, we're going to spend some money, but we're not going to spend enough money to keep all of you alive because that's kind of too much money to spend. But we are going to spend a bit because our public relations would not suffer that as a transgression. Letting people die in your own country is not a good look for a nation. And you can see that on that world pecking order. The United States, it is very fair to say, has lost some of its international credibility because of how seemingly paralysed they are in acting on this crisis. But does that matter when they have the biggest military in the world? Who knows? Maybe. Soft and hard power are confusing topics and probably the subject for an entire different video. I must have mentioned like 4 extra videos here. I don't know why I keep making this work for myself and poor old Frankie. I think at its core, this is more a preface to some of the stuff we're going to talk about later. But I need you, if you're going to follow along in this kind of educational journey we're going on, and Lord, that term sounds horrible. I'm never using that again. In order to understand some of the stuff we're going to talk about, you need to boot the idea from your mind that nations work like people, and that their motivations require much more interrogation than a person's does. Final food for thought before I go and make some dinner or something. If your country, or any country, was given a choice between saving thousands upon thousands of lives, but spending a lot of money, that's largely a construct anyway, would the nation take that choice? Would you, as a private individual, as a human being, make that choice? Well, probably yes. If somebody said to you, listen, right, it's not going to come out of your pocket, this money, it's kind of going to come out of everyone's pocket, and also we'll just kind of invent a bit as well, because we can do that. And you can prevent 500,000 people dying, but you've got to spend some money. Most people, I think, would immediately spend the money. They would go, wow, yeah, of course, 500,000 people dying is a bad thing, right? We'll spend the money. But as a nation, would they? What is the cost beyond the lives of those 500,000 people dying? Is this an acceptable loss for the cost? Uncomfortable realizations or uncomfortable pieces of information, and you may not believe this. You may sit there and think, my country cares about me. I am integral to its operating, to its day-to-day activities. Or I just live in a good country that's good and nice and looks after people. And if you believe that, then please don't let me shatter your faith. But do ask yourself whether or not that's true, because I think something we have learned on the back of this pandemic is that there is a value associated with human life when you are considering it from the world stage. And what that value is probably varies from country to country. Ireland, for example, which has a very similar level of healthcare and capacity for healthcare per capita as the United Kingdom, has only lost 300 people-ish to coronavirus. We're approaching the 11 to 12,000 mark at the time of recording. Why? Ireland spent a lot of money very, very fast, buying protective equipment, limiting people, locking situations down. They accepted the opportunity cost of a lockdown would mean an economic nosedive, but they did it earlier, they did it faster, and they've done it more effectively. England, specifically, has done a lot worse, because somebody, or a group of people, a party even, one could say, made the decision not to take that opportunity cost, not to spend that money, and to accept that more people were going to die. Whether or not that was the right thing to do, history will probably tell us, but it doesn't make you feel great when you're only really about 50 miles apart from the country that didn't make that choice. So that's it. Nations. They don't work like people and don't expect them to, is the end of the video. That's not too hopeful, I know, I'm really sorry. The next video, I promise, will be a bit brighter, but we need to do some of the groundwork first. And I thank you for sticking with me if you have, because that was longer, but I'm not going to say how long, because editing, it turns out, reduces the length of a video. Why would you say that at the end of your first video? Anyway, have a wonderful afternoon. At least the weather is still beautiful, at least here in the UK, and wherever you are in the world, stay safe.